Hello everyone, I'm Rose, and let me share my story with you. My mother-in-law, Sherry, used to be a different person, not the vain and shallow woman she is now. This change occurred later in her life, or at least that's what my husband Dylan believes. Growing up, Dylan and Sherry didn't have a lavish lifestyle. They led a modest life together after Dylan's father passed away when he was just 4 years old. Sherry took on the role of the breadwinner, and they lived a simple life until Dylan secured a great job after college. Dylan is a remarkable and kind man, not just because he's my husband. He earned a full scholarship to medical school and became a doctor. Despite his success, Dylan remained humble. However, Sherry's life took a turn for the luxurious. Now, let me clarify. I don't have a job for reasons I'll discuss later, but that doesn't mean I am poor or dependent on others. Unfortunately, Sherry got the wrong impression of me when we first met. Whether it was my clothes or mannerisms, something repelled her. On our first encounter, she said, "Dylan, is this the girl you've been raving about? She's so plain and average. Why would you choose someone like her? Does she even have a job?" My name is Rose, and no, I don't have a job. However, Sherry assumed that meant I was planning to trap her son and drain his money. She labeled me as a gold digger and a parasite, making baseless assumptions about my character. Dylan defended me, but the argument escalated and we decided to leave. During our journey home, Dylan apologized for his mother's behavior, acknowledging that she had crossed a line. He reassured me, saying his mom no longer knows how to act like a sane person. Although her words hurt, Dylan asked me not to mind them. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that being comfortable around Sherry might be a challenge. After all, she's the only parent Dylan has left. I decided to step back. We don't have much extended family, and completely cutting her off isn't feasible. I won't push you to be friends with her, but can you at least be civil around her? I can act respectfully towards your mom, Dylan, but I doubt she'll reciprocate. Don't worry, Rose. I'll keep her in check. If she crosses the line, we can consider reducing contact. I love my mom, but I love you too. I won't let her harass you for no reason. I was skeptical about my relationship with Sherry. Dylan assured me he'd stand up for me, but I still felt uneasy. Dylan and I got married 3 years after we started dating. We had a court wedding due to financial constraints. Dylan was sending Sherry a lot of money every month for emergencies. Even after we married, he continued this practice, straining our finances. I didn't stop him. I believed he had the right to help his mom. However, Sherry became a problem. She regularly spoke ill of me and gossiped with her friends, spreading rumors about me being a gold digger. I ignored it initially, but it started affecting my reputation. Despite Dylan's efforts, Sherry never treated me kindly. She believed I wasn't good enough for her son. Surprisingly, one day, Dylan told me that his mom wanted to invite me to a small party she was hosting. I was skeptical since she disliked me. Dylan assured me that she promised to improve and wanted me there. It seemed odd considering her recent financial struggles, but Dylan believed she managed somehow. I agreed to go, despite my concerns about her behavior. Dylan hoped his mom was making an effort, so I decided to keep an open mind. I truly wanted us to mend our relationship and become friends. I had serious doubts that Sherry would ever consider being friends with me, despite my willingness to be civil and make an effort for Dylan's sake. It seemed that Sherry had little regard for his happiness. Despite my skepticism, I decided to attend the party, eagerly waiting for Sherry to provide details. Sherry texted me the next day, and I assumed she was extending the invitation. However, her message took an unexpected turn. She started by mentioning the party at a 5-star hotel everyone had been raving about, promising her friends a great time. This excited her, and she planned to take 15 people. Curious, I asked if I was invited, given Dylan's assurance. To my surprise, Sherry responded with arrogance and disdain. She made it clear that I was not invited, emphasizing the exclusivity of the event due to her wealth, family status, and the supposed classiness of her friends. I was taken aback and confused, As Dylan had genuinely believed Sherry was extending an invitation, I expressed my assumption, only to be met with Sherry's condescending remarks, stating that I wouldn't understand the intricacies of planning such an event. I decided to maintain my dignity, acknowledging her message and clarifying that I wouldn't attend if I wasn't wanted. Sherry reiterated her stance, emphasizing her class and status, while I resisted the urge to respond with anger. Disappointed and hurt, I chose not to share this with Dylan. Instead, I patiently waited for the day of the party. Sherry, oblivious to the emotional impact of her actions, sent me a picture showcasing her and her friends in designer outfits, flaunting their status on social media. I refrained from responding, choosing to focus on my work and patiently await the unfolding of events. After about 3 hours, I received a call from my dad, and here's a confession for you all. My dad owns the hotel where Sherry was hosting her party. Sherry had no clue about this. 3 years ago, I inherited a substantial amount from my grandfather, which I invested in my dad's business. Now, I receive a share of the profits from the hotel and other family-owned businesses. Despite coming from a well-off family, I prefer not to broadcast it, and that's why Sherry was unaware of my background. She also had no idea about the high cost of the 5-star hotel and its restaurant. Sherry let her friends order without checking the menu or prices, resulting in a hefty $2,000 bill. This turn of events was the perfect opportunity for revenge. My dad called me to inform me that Sherry was at the hotel, having amassed a $2,000 bill. She was now asking for a 50% discount, claiming she was short on cash. My dad sought my advice, as Sherry's party had been rude and entitled, upsetting the staff. As expected, I shared my frustration with my dad, recounting how Sherry had boasted about the party to mock me for not being invited. The irony was not lost on me, given that she couldn't even afford the party she was flaunting. My dad expressed his understanding of the situation and shared the challenges faced by his staff due to Sherry's behavior. I saw an opportunity for revenge and suggested making Sherry and her team wash the dishes, clean the entire kitchen and the floor, given their insulting behavior. I wanted to extend this revenge to include Sherry's team, who had also mistreated our staff. If Sherry tried anything foolish, my dad could call the cops on her. My dad laughed at the suggestion, giving it a big thumbs up. He even offered to share pictures of the event. It seemed like the perfect chance to turn the tables and teach Sherry a lesson about humility and respect. When it happened, I would have relished seeing Sherry face the consequences of her actions. My dad promised to follow my suggestion and hung up. An hour or so later, he sent me pictures of Sherry and her friends washing dishes and wiping the floor at our restaurants. Dad also shared that when Sherry saw him as the restaurant owner, she looked relieved. She began telling him that she knew the owner and they would get out of the situation. To her surprise, Dad instructed her to clean his restaurants. She was dumbstruck for a while, and when she started to protest, Dad reminded her that since she didn't consider me family, he didn't consider her family either. It was a hilarious turn of events, and though I wished I was there, I did get some good pictures. After a while, Dylan came home looking visibly upset. I could tell he had heard from Sherry about what happened, and I knew she must have given him a twisted account of the events. He approached me, questioning what he heard about my dad making his mom clean the restaurant dishes. I explained to Dylan that it was the usual norm for us in such situations. Sherry had gone to our restaurant, racked up a $2,000 bill, claimed she didn't have more than $1,000, harassed our staff, and her party had been a nightmare. I believe this punishment was fitting. Dylan seemed surprised and questioned who Sherry had taken with her and what they ordered. I informed him that she took 15 people, and they ordered a lot, especially the fancy items. He expressed disbelief, as Sherry had told him she was taking only 4 people and had invited me, but I declined. I clarified that things didn't happen that way, and I showed him the text messages from Sherry. Dylan requested the bills and asked me to show him the texts, wanting to understand the situation better. I showed Dylan all the texts, and my dad sent him the bills. I also presented some pictures to illustrate the scale of Sherry's party. Dylan grew extremely mad when he saw everything. He called Sherry, asking her what was wrong and why she hadn't told him the full story. Sherry claimed she only mentioned being short of cash, and I must have given him a different story to sabotage her. Dylan confronted her, pointing out that she declined my invitation and insulted me by saying I wasn't classy enough for her. Sherry tried to brush it off as a harmless joke, but Dylan wasn't buying it. He questioned her spending thousands of dollars taken from him on friends while insulting his wife. He called her out for her actions, stating that spending $2,000 on food and drink wasn't a small matter. Sherry was left trying to justify her actions, while Dylan expressed his disbelief at her behavior. "I made a mistake by giving you money whenever you shared stories about needing it, Mom." "Well, guess what? I'm not giving you any money again. But Dylan, you've been so supportive for so long. You can't just stop now. It was a one-time mistake." "Dylan, why are you overreacting?" "No, Mom, I am not overreacting. This is not a one-time mistake. If you can't even consider my wife as family, I don't want anything to do with you. I always thought you would change your mind, but you never did. I'm not paying you to insult my wife and call her classless while she sacrifices a lot to support you. This ends now." Dylan didn't listen to Sherry anymore. He hung up on her and blocked her number. He also apologized profusely to me for being mad at me without knowing the full story. I forgave him because, well, he did stand up for me. We had a serious discussion about Sherry and jointly decided that she will no longer be in our lives for now. Yes, Dylan is now a wealthy man, but he knows to stay humble. He found Sherry's behavior completely unacceptable, especially because it was directed towards me. I agreed with the fact that it was very unfair to me, and I was all set to remove her from our life for good. In the next few days, Sherry reached peak madness. She realized that her own actions may have damaged her relationship with her son for good, sending her into a horrible panic. She showed up at our house and demanded to speak with Dylan. Slowly, her demands turned into begging after she was turned away from the door every time. Yes, Sherry worked and earned some money. However, it wasn't enough for the high-end lifestyle she had gotten used to all these years. Dylan had stopped giving her money entirely. Instead, he invested some of his funds into my dad's business to help him open new hotels and restaurants in the neighborhood. We do plan on expanding our hotel business to bigger cities, but we'll have to see what the future holds. Since Dylan stopped sending her funds, Sherry had to downgrade her lifestyle significantly. She was struggling to keep the rented condo with her own money and ultimately decided to end her lease. She has now shifted to a small one-bedroom apartment and doesn't have any money to spend on extras after all the bill payments. How do we know this? She emails us about it. Of course, she still downplays her behavior and acts like we are overreacting. Suffice it to say, she will be out of our lives for a while now. Just a month ago, I found out that I was pregnant. Dylan and I are overjoyed and busy planning everything before our baby comes. To be honest, I'm glad that my child won't be around shallow people like Sherry anymore. But if the time comes, I will make sure my dear mother-in-law doesn't get to fill my child's head with nonsense. For now, please wish us luck so that we can be good parents to a healthy child. Let's move in with my parents starting today. My husband unexpectedly proposed. Since they are my parents, I thought there shouldn't be any problem, right? However, the sudden suggestion left me stunned and almost on the verge of tears, as there had been no prior hint. This proposal came just a few days after the funeral of my father, who had battled illness for a long time. Despite the lingering atmosphere of sorrow from the funeral, my husband packed up and left our home. The destination was a villa my father had left for me. Surprisingly, my in-laws had already arrived and were staying in the villa. My name is Natalie, a 33-year-old designer who recently became independent. I've been living with Justin for 3 years after our marriage, and my career is going well. The apartment is in my name, and my father's recent passing had left me in a state of emotional turmoil. During my college years, my mother passed away, and last year, my father was diagnosed with malignant tumors. Despite undergoing treatment, the disease reached its final stages. When my father passed away, I had already moved out and was living alone. However, my father remained an important figure in my life, frequently keeping in touch. As my father's health deteriorated, my husband, Justin, would inquire about his condition, but it felt insincere. It seemed as if he was waiting for my father's passing. My husband had always struggled with a sense of inferiority due to earning less than me. I had hoped for support during tough times, but his competitive and childish side emerged. My father advised not to worry about him and to prioritize our time as a couple. However, I felt a growing disdain for my husband, especially with his insensitive remarks about my father's illness. In our early married days, our time together was joyful, but my husband had transformed, and I struggled to accept this change. While I planned to work from home after becoming independent, my husband claimed having someone around distracted him. Consequently, I rented a small office and started commuting. Balancing work, attending to my father, and returning home exhausted, I found my husband's disregard for household chores and my feelings increasingly lonely. Then my father passed away, and amidst funeral preparations, my husband seemed uninterested and preoccupied with other matters. I found myself pleading, "Justin, please help me," especially during such a tough time. Attempting to convey my feelings, I found myself interrupted as my husband's phone rang. After concluding the call, he laughed, saying he had been receiving numerous work calls. Inside, my anger and disappointment towards him grew stronger, perhaps exacerbated by the premature loss of my father. His words had grown colder, and a deep sadness enveloped me. On the day of the funeral, my husband spent an extended period in conversation with his parents. Upon their return, they were all smirking, and the suspicious glances from other attendees intensified my sense of isolation. Despite this, the cremation, interment, and inheritance procedures went smoothly, and the funeral concluded successfully. Unexpectedly, my husband suggested, "Let's live with my parents from today. They're my parents, so it shouldn't be a problem, right?" Repeating the statement casually, he added, "If you're against it, should we get divorced?" His laughter accompanied this unreasonable proposition, and I couldn't stay calm after hearing it, especially fueled by the grief of losing my father. I strongly countered, "Live together where we don't have any spare rooms in this apartment, do we?" In reality, one room in our apartment served as a workspace and stored my husband's work materials. Since we didn't have children, he used the room lavishly. "It's that villa you inherited," he responded with a smile. Stunned, I explained that the family home was sold, and the villa held sentimental value for my father and me. However, my husband seemed indifferent to my feelings and continued making selfish demands. "I hope you understand that living in that villa would be difficult," I expressed. Yet my husband didn't seem to listen. His parents had already terminated their apartment lease and decided to move to the villa. Their move had likely been arranged during my father's funeral. Considering the villa's spaciousness and tranquil location, their decision left no room for objection. Whenever I voiced my opinion, my husband showed clear displeasure. Accusing me of self-centeredness, he claimed I had been absent from home due to my father's illness. His cruel words darkened my world, insisting that now that my father had passed away, I should listen to him. He even remarked that my father's year-long battle with illness was too lengthy. Though filled with disbelief, I resisted accepting the true nature of my husband. It became increasingly evident that he had little regard for my father and me. Memories of my father's pained expressions on his narrow hospital bed flooded my mind. I knew my father wouldn't have wanted to leave his only daughter behind, nor would he have wanted me to blindly obey my husband. In that moment, I felt a clear vanishing of my affection for my husband, my heart heavy with the realization. As I thought about my husband finding joy in acquiring the villa during the time I should have been mourning my father's death, I suppressed my emotions and continued cautioning him. "You can try living in the villa, but don't regret it later," I advised. Doubting that he would heed my words, I had to accept his determination. Packing only the essentials, I left our home, seeing the puzzled look on my husband's face as he observed my few possessions. All I said was, "I'll come back for what I need later." Frankly, I didn't even want to exchange another word with him. The excruciating part was seeing the faces of my in-laws, who I imagined had eagerly awaited my father's death and were now gleefully moving in. Silently, I followed my husband. The only thing I couldn't accept was my beloved place being taken over by his whims. Despite being technically a villa, it was a single-family home by the sea, located in a neighborhood where people led ordinary lives. Conveniently accessible from the city center, the land was indeed valuable. Exiting the station, the familiar scenery from my childhood spread out before me. Back then, my mother was still alive, and after falling asleep during a train ride, my father would carry me on his back all the way home. When we arrived at the villa, my in-laws were already inside. Suspicion arose as it seemed my husband had secretly taken the key and given a duplicate to my in-laws without my knowledge. This realization heightened my unease, intensifying my distrust. As I glanced around the villa, my in-laws' eyes shone with anticipation of their future life here. Though a single-family home, the sturdy furniture my father had carefully chosen was arranged throughout, giving it a slightly different European style. These furnishings likely appealed to my mother's taste. Despite my inner turmoil, my in-laws commented enthusiastically, underestimating the significance of my father's passing and regarding the villa merely as a luxurious, beautiful house. They considered themselves fortunate to have such an impeccable location and house. I felt gratitude that my husband had left us this magnificent villa, though his lack of delicacy in expressing it left me uneasy. Both he and his inconsiderate parents joined in laughing, expressing their thanks to my father, and proceeded to open beers to toast the move. As I prepared snacks, I sighed deeply, watching them taint the precious memories I had shared with my parents at the dining table. Determined to hide my feelings, I endured the night. The following morning, the atmosphere in the quiet villa changed instantly as my mother-in-law's shrill scream echoed through the space. Waking up, I noticed my father-in-law and husband causing a commotion, and I was slightly delayed in approaching the source of the scream. In the bathroom, my mother-in-law was on the floor, clutching her foot with a panicked expression, explaining that the floor had given way beneath her. While my husband and father-in-law seemed unable to grasp the situation, I examined the floor, which appeared smooth and perfectly aligned. Still shaken, my mother-in-law insisted that the floor had collapsed. Addressing them, I suggested, "Have you tried stepping on that slightly differently colored part of the floor?" All three of them looked surprised as they fixed their gaze on that spot. Stepping in between them, I leaned forward and pressed on the differently colored section with my slippered foot. To their amazement, the floorboard made a clear sound and slightly sunk, snapping back into place the moment I lifted my foot. Explaining calmly, I revealed, "It's not a defect. My father intentionally installed it in this house." Their skepticism and surprise were evident as I continued. He called it a mechanical mansion or a trick house. As a huge ninja enthusiast, this villa was his pride and joy, filled with traps and mechanisms he designed over many years. I shared that as a child, I often visited the villa while my father adjusted its mechanisms or added new ones. Thus, the villa was adorned with traps like a dropping floorboard, a shelf one shouldn't touch, a door that opened following a specific sequence, hidden doors, and even secret rooms. It was a place filled with the dreams and cleverness of my father, making it a treasure suited for daily life. Growing up, my father had taught me how to operate all the traps in the villa, making me well-versed in its peculiarities. However, for my husband and in-laws, unfamiliarity posed a challenge. Despite my prior warnings about the difficulties of living in this place filled with my father's memories, they seemed captivated by its luxury and disregarded my advice. My father's extreme ninja obsession, which was famous among our relatives, had somehow escaped their knowledge. My husband claimed ignorance initially, but now he was at a loss for words. My in-laws were equally shocked, having already canceled our apartment lease and now finding themselves with nowhere to return. In the midst of their confusion, both my father-in-law and husband accidentally triggered another trap, leading to their comical fall. Seeing them on the ground, I couldn't help but chuckle, offering a mocking invitation. Please feel free to stay as long as you like. Their oversight and disregard for my father's hobbies were coming back to haunt them. Even explaining the dangers of the traps fell on deaf ears as my husband confidently asserted, "This isn't a big deal. We'll get used to it." Acknowledging his comment with a confident smile, I pretended to prepare for our move back to the apartment. In reality, I had no moving preparations planned. I intended to take a few days off, spending time sorting through my father's belongings. After just 2 days, my husband and in-laws reached their limit in the villa. Meanwhile, I found solace being by myself, slowly regaining a positive outlook and planning my new life. Before long, my father's villa became a minor tourist attraction in the neighborhood. It was regularly featured in local newsletters as the trick mansion hidden in a residential area, gaining attention during times of exploration and intrigue. When the villa became a popular attraction, intrigued individuals would visit to explore the trick mansion. Reflecting on the past, I recalled strangers touring the villa and local children playing, making it a lively spot. My father had listed both the villas and our family home's phone numbers in the newsletters. However, as the family home was sold, any inquiries now came to the villa's number. Given my upbringing, I was proficient enough in foreign languages to manage calls from international visitors. However, my husband and in-laws struggled with foreign languages and were overwhelmed by unexpected visitors and calls. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, they stumbled back to the apartment. In a surprising turn of events, they suggested living together in the apartment. This suggestion came after they had longed for my father's early demise to acquire the villa, only to give it up in just 2 days. Instead of serving them tea, I handed my husband already filled out divorce papers, stamped in my section. "There's no way we can live together. If you understand, just leave quickly," I explained with a deep sigh. My decision stemmed from his disregard for my feelings, acting insensitively without consultation or explanation. My husband had never shared household responsibilities with me and had unilaterally decided to move in with his parents. Unable to imagine continuing to live with someone like that, I confronted him about his callousness and disregard for my father. His oblivious remarks and lack of remorse prompted laughter from me. "You think I could love someone who wished for my beloved father's early death and would rejoice when he passed?" I handed him only the divorce papers and drove them out of the apartment. Asserting my ownership, I calmly reminded my husband that the apartment was under my name, threatening to call the police for trespassing. I made it clear that they should leave quietly. They fell silent upon hearing this, as they relied on me financially and didn't have much of their own. Before their lengthy persuasions could begin, I had decided to cut ties. Both my husband and in-laws, lacking substantial savings, now found themselves struggling to make ends meet in a cheap, low-quality apartment. At first, my husband felt guilty and apologized frequently, but over time, resentment grew. His parents, due to their age, rarely worked and exhausted their savings and pension with every move. Frequent arguments and strained family relationships were evident in the thin-walled apartment. Despite noise complaints, they retaliated rather than apologizing, earning the disapproval of their neighbors. Facing the consequences of their actions, they might soon need to find a new place to live. My husband, previously enjoying working from home, now lacked a dedicated workspace. Unable to concentrate on his job, his reputation and sales plummeted, forcing him to rely on a late-night convenience store job and consider juggling multiple part-time jobs. The in-laws blamed the villa's traps in their frequent arguments, regretting letting their son control their decisions and placing blame on secrets kept by others. "Shut up! If you had communicated properly with your father, this wouldn't have happened. I never imagined we'd end up like this because of our son," they exclaimed, expressing their frustration. Yet it was clear that they had always harbored a desire to inherit the villa, and were overjoyed when my father passed away. After the divorce, I made significant strides in my career as a designer. To process my father's death and the events that followed, I created designs incorporating ninja elements and showcased them on social media. The popularity of these designs spread rapidly, catching the attention of a major cosmetics company. To my astonishment, they wanted me to design packaging with an Asian touch, incorporating ninja elements. Feeling that this work would preserve my father's cherished memories, I eagerly took on the project and committed fully to it. Ultimately, it was a huge success, propelling my career forward. I could now give joyful updates at my parents' graves. I retained the mechanical house, keeping it as a special place filled with memories of my father. Organizing tour schedules and making a few tweaks, I turned it into a space where both tourists and local children could enjoy for free. The house soon attracted significant media attention, and the income from this exposure was a godsend, helping to defray ongoing costs. Online articles about the house were translated into foreign languages, leading to support from international fans, including donations from elderly folks who shared my father's passion for ninjas. Dedicated to the ongoing upkeep of this magical place, the mechanical house remains a daily hub of activity, especially among local children. With local volunteers' assistance, precautions are taken to ensure the children play safely. Foreign tourists are often astonished by features like the hidden floorboard doors, exclaiming, "Wow, this is amazing. I'm so moved to experience such a unique place. What other tricks are here?" Despite losing my father and the inheritance of the villa resulting in my divorce, I feel the gains have been greater than the losses. The villa has transformed into a memory-rich location shared with family and friends. I've also undergone a personal transformation, moving forward with renewed optimism and hope. Nancy peered down at me, her expression dripping with disdain, and my stomach churned uneasily. Despite the discomfort gnawing at me, I kept it in check as she leaned in to whisper something into James' ear, seemingly oblivious to my unease. Annoyed by my lingering gaze, James brushed Nancy aside and confronted me. "What's your problem? Don't take it out on us just because you're not talented," he spat, his self-importance swelling with every word. His arrogance only deepened my sense of inadequacy, but I chose silence. Engaging him would only drag me down to his level. "If only we put James in charge from the start instead of you clinging to pointless pride," Nancy sneered, pushing me over the edge. Frustration boiled within me. "All right then, why don't you enlighten me on what's so crucial about running a company? Up until now, I've been neglecting their issues, but being directly attacked like this was more than I could bear." At that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer. I had to stand up against James and Nancy, who saw employees as nothing more than disposable pawns if it served their interests. James stood dumbfounded, speechless in the face of my outburst. Turning to Nancy, I continued, "If you have any intention of supporting James as his wife, you can at least offer constructive advice, can't you?" Caught off guard, Nancy floundered, her eyes darting aimlessly around the room. "My name is Emma. At 32 years old, I am a single woman running a company that has been in my family since my grandfather Robert's time. Though he's retired now, my father, Richard, was supposed to take over but pursued other ambitions. Like him, my partner James follows his passions instead of joining the family business. Richard became a renowned musician, and now, in his absence, I run the company founded by Robert. We were raised in affluence, but our lifestyle remains modest. Robert's mantra, "Once you raise your standard of living, it's almost impossible to lower it," guides us. Despite Robert's success and Richard's fame, our lifestyle remains unchanged. Birthdays, school admissions, graduations, we may splurge on special occasions, but luxury cars and designer brands aren't our norm. Extra money is reinvested or donated. Living modestly has become second nature to us. I refrain from boasting about my family's business accomplishments, even with old school friends. In high school, I made the mistake of casually mentioning to a boyfriend that my family was well off, and the dynamics shifted overnight. He began expecting lavish gifts for his birthday, and suddenly, I found myself covering all our date expenses. After that experience, I became hesitant to discuss our financial situation, particularly since I received my allowance from my mom, Jennifer. I aimed to avoid attracting people who were solely interested in my money. During my time working for Robert's company, I never disclosed my connection as his grandchild. I preferred to be treated like any other employee, steering clear of potential jealousy and office gossip. Then came the day when James introduced us to Nancy, who later became his wife. Richard, away on a world tour as a musician, left Jennifer and Robert to welcome her. From what I gathered, neither Robert nor Jennifer was impressed initially, but Richard later approved, emphasizing that love mattered most. Fast forward to a New Year's celebration when James and Nancy visited our family home, coinciding with Richard's presence, making it a full house of 6. The conversation shifted to my salary, and James and Nancy began questioning why it was relatively low. Despite being the boss's grandchild, they argued I should have more influence. Robert, who would typically put James in his place, had retired for the night. Jennifer, busy in the kitchen preparing soup, and Richard, not fully aware of my current situation, observed our exchange in silence. I earn what I do because I'm still in the process of learning. It's as straightforward as that. While it's true that I receive a higher salary than some who have been with the company longer, solely due to being the CEO's grandchild, I found myself in a heated argument with the perpetually complaining James. I emphasized that receiving special treatment holds little value if I can't contribute significantly to the company. Moreover, having extra money becomes meaningless when there's no purpose for it. I suggested there are plenty of ways to utilize wealth, and consideration for others should be a priority. Nancy raised her objections, and I frowned, struggling to understand her perspective. Glancing at Richard, I found him engrossed in the TV, offering no insight into his thoughts. Despite my satisfaction with my current salary and working conditions, primarily because I can afford anything I desire, James and his wife remained dissatisfied. Despite the family tension during the New Year's celebration, I maintained a separation between my work and personal life. I diligently tackled my job responsibilities. A few days after the holiday, during a short break at home, James called to apologize for the previous disagreement. He admitted to getting carried away and acknowledged that being back home after so long had influenced their behavior. Money isn't everything, he claimed, echoing Nancy's sentiments. Though Nancy expressed regret for overstepping, I was left speechless by James's subdued apology. Reflecting on the fact that both had been drinking that night, and being back home might have emboldened them, I couldn't shake off a lingering sense of discomfort, especially considering Nancy's words, though seemingly repentant. I chose to overlook the previous incident and threw myself even more deeply into my work, finding fulfillment in the process. Eventually, my dedication began to yield results, with discussions of a potential promotion circulating. Upon arriving home, I was greeted by Robert, who awaited me at the entrance and summoned me to his room. "It seems you've been working hard," he remarked. "It's about time I started imparting my responsibilities to you. I plan on you eventually taking over the company. Stick with me." His words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I had studied economics in college, preparing myself for the eventual responsibility of leading the company. My efforts to not only enhance my department, but also improve the entire organization were finally bearing fruit. However, the sudden talk of assuming the company's reins sooner than anticipated left me somewhat shaken. Nevertheless, I had little time to dwell on it as Robert immediately began mentoring me intensively, imparting his knowledge. Lost in absorbing all that Robert had to offer, I had completely forgotten about James and Nancy. After days of rigorous training with Robert, I returned home exhausted. Soon after, Robert retired, entrusting me with the company's future. "Emma, you've done well. I trust that you can take it from here," he said, before building an annex on the property and settling into his leisurely retirement. Sometime after officially assuming control of the company, James reached out to me again. "Ah, Emma, I need to discuss something with you." He began apologetically. "It's Nancy's birthday this month, and I want to get her a gift. In the past, I managed to scrape something together, but this year, I found the perfect accessory. I couldn't shake the thought of it. Basically, I need to borrow money, but it's for Nancy's birthday gift." I agreed to lend James around $300, feeling happy to assist. Shortly after, I received an unexpected call from Nancy, a rare occurrence. Surprisingly, she thanks me for the gift, implying James informed her of my help. It strikes me as endearing that he shared this, though unnecessary. However, Nancy's call takes an unexpected turn. "We're planning a trip together, but we're a bit short on cash. Can you help us out?" "We'll repay you quickly," she asks. Sensing it as a high-value return gift for my assistance to James, I agree once more. Following that, the couple begins to seek financial assistance for various expenses. Initially, it's easy to say yes, but over time their requests grow, and their demeanor changes. Eventually, losing trust in their intentions, I ignore Nancy's calls. However, both James and Nancy persist, bombarding me with incessant calls. Finally answering, Nancy immediately confronts me with frustration, demanding why I have it picked up. "Let me guess, Nancy, you need money again." I retort. Her response is defensive. "I'm spending the money so it won't go to waste in your business." Her logic bewilders me. "You're spending my money for what?" I interject, irritated. Nancy's tone escalates, questioning my income. "How much are you making a year?" she probes. "Right now, I'm only making around $30,000. I just started in my position." I respond honestly. Nancy's reaction is disdainful. "That's what you get for being so showy and not letting James take over the business." She scoffs, her attitude inflating. Her statement puzzles me. James had made it clear he didn't want to take over Robert's company, opting to pursue his dream of becoming a musician. So, why is James even part of this conversation? Before I can reply, Nancy interrupts. "Look, I need $5,000 by the day after tomorrow. Make sure it's ready," she declared, hanging up abruptly, leaving the room in an uneasy silence. In the past, I had provided her with up to $2,000, but this sudden demand for $5,000, coupled with her insensitive comments about being more considerate, irked me. Deciding to seek counsel, I went to Robert, who was in a separate building. I laid out the situation, and he let out a deep sigh, anticipating a scolding for my lenient lending practices. Richard has musical talent. That's why I let him do his thing. James, however, has nothing. Even if he joined a company, he wouldn't amount to anything. I always knew it, Robert sighed. For a moment, I wondered what they were talking about, then realized it was about Richard and James. The choices both made were similar. Neither took over Robert's company. Both were interested in music-related pursuits. The crucial difference was their work ethic. Richard thought for himself, brainstormed, and searched for the best ways to achieve his goals. In contrast, James simply copied Richard and chose music because he didn't want to work. Richard had succeeded, while James was still struggling. Robert added, "I also never liked James's wife, just so you know." Sighing and holding his head in his hands, Robert continued, "Emma, listen carefully. You need to do exactly as I say from now on." Confused, I nodded, clenching my teeth, unsure of what would unfold next. First, I contacted Richard, who luckily was still in the States and promised to adjust his plans after I explained the situation. Next, I spoke to Jennifer, who listened quietly, her eyes downcast. However, she nodded firmly when I finished talking. Prepared for the next day with mixed feelings, I woke up and went to the bank in the morning to withdraw the money before heading to the office. I settled into my still unfamiliar office chair, took a deep breath, and decided to address the ongoing issue with James. After a while, I received a message that James and his wife were causing a commotion in the reception area. I invited them into my office. "Emma, what do you mean you won't support us anymore?" James immediately yelled at me, Despite my gesturing for them to sit, both James and his wife continued yelling without taking a seat. In response, I sighed and moved to the reception area's couch, placing an envelope quietly on the table. Nancy sat on the couch across from me, checking the contents of the envelope. "Hey, this isn't enough. What's the deal?" James joined Nancy, examining the envelope, and pointed out that it only contained half of the agreed-upon $5,000. "That's right. We agreed on $5,000, didn't we?" James protested. The envelope fell short of their expectations, but the amount had been decided by me, following Robert's advice to determine the final financial assistance. "This is the best I can do. I can't afford to give any more," I explained. James and Nancy scoffed at my response. James confronted me. "That's it? This is not doing so well." Ignoring my annoyed expression, Nancy whispered something in James's ear. Displeased with my reaction, James pushed Nancy aside and accused me of letting my lack of business skills affect them. Instead of responding, I chose to remain silent, refusing to stoop to their level. Nancy sneered, suggesting that if I had left the company to James from the start, none of this would have happened. At that point, my patience snapped. I pointed out that James, who prioritized music over employment and relied on parental privilege, couldn't effectively manage a business. I emphasized their parasitic lifestyle, living off me and now attempting to depend on Robert's company. "If you're going to say that, I hope you understand what's important in running a business," I asserted. Normally, I would avoid confrontation, but I had reached my limits. Outraged by James and Nancy's self-serving attitude, treating employees as pawns, I finally raised my voice. I glanced at James, whose mouth hung open, then turned to Nancy. "If you plan on supporting James as his wife, I hope you can at least give some sound advice." Nancy, caught off guard by the shift in conversation, stared in silence. Neither wanting to join Robert's company nor working hard like Richard, I can't entrust my business to people like you. The money I can give is all I have. Why don't you come over tonight?" I said, ushering James and Nancy out of the office before returning to my work. Later that night, James and his wife showed up at my house. They found Robert wearing an almost devilish expression, Richard maintaining a poker face, and Jennifer with her back turned to everyone. "Sit wherever you like," I said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. I gestured for James and his wife to join, but instead, they chose to sit formally on their knees in front of the living room sofa where Robert and Richard were seated. It was clear they were putting on airs, but didn't dare to act disrespectful in front of Robert. Richard was the first to speak, addressing James and Nancy. "What are your plans for the future?" Caught off guard, they exchanged bewildered glances and said nothing. When Richard called out James's name, he visibly flinched and cautiously looked up. "When will you be making your debut, James?" Richard questioned. James seemed unable to comprehend the question, staring blankly. Richard said no more, holding James in his gaze. Growing impatient, Robert spoke up, addressing Nancy. "Do you really think the company will do better under James than Emma? And if so, why?" Nancy had no answer, looking down in silence. The kitchen fell silent, and eventually, Jennifer took a satisfied breath as an array of dishes lined the kitchen counter. "All right, James, Nancy, come on over. Let's eat before it gets cold," Jennifer said, and everyone gathered in the kitchen, quietly taking their seats. The tense meal commenced, and even Jennifer's usually delicious cooking seemed to lack flavor. After finishing the meal, as Richard and I cleaned the table, Jennifer served coffee. She placed cups in front of Robert and James and his wife, then took a seat next to Robert. "How was your last supper, James?" Jennifer asked, startling everyone. "What are you talking about?" James responded. Jennifer declared, "Starting today, you are no longer our son, James and Nancy. Sorry, but please stay away from this house and from Emma. That includes her company as well." Ignoring my startled glance, Richard continued doing the dishes, and Robert sat in silence, sipping his coffee. Though I had asked Jennifer to scold James, I never expected this. Unfazed by our astonishment, Jennifer concluded, "We've been lenient with James because of Richard." But that was a mistake. I initially brushed off James' requests for increasingly expensive gifts as mere desires. However, Jennifer's piercing gaze at James, who lowered his eyes and shrugged, shifted my perspective. Addressing Nancy, Jennifer pointed out her penchant for luxury brands, contrasting sharply with our modest lifestyle. Nancy, visibly uncomfortable in her designer labels, received Jennifer's words in silence. Handing back the money they received from me, Jennifer advised them to leave. As Jennifer exited the kitchen, Richard finished cleaning and headed upstairs, while Robert returned to the annex after washing his teacup. Observing the tension between James and his wife, I sighed and retreated to my room. Soon, the sound of arguing voices echoed from the kitchen, but I chose to ignore them. Eventually, I heard the front door close, signaling James and his wife's departure. The house grew quiet as I planned for the next day's work. In the end, James and Nancy divorced. James, who chased dreams of becoming a musician without stable income, now works as a day laborer to repay debts. Nancy, financially reliant on her parents, faced dissownment alongside James. Initially juggling part-time jobs, their unsustainable lifestyle led to the crumbling of their marriage. James and I grew up in similar privileged yet frugal environments. However, James harbored resentment towards our lifestyle, believing he could attain wealth without traditional employment like Richard. Opting for a lavish existence post-marriage, James's choices led to his downfall. Nancy, hoping for financial security, found herself disillusioned with the outcome. For me, diligent work and commitment to improvement have been paramount, even before Robert's retirement. The employee's satisfaction reflects our progress, bringing me relief. Though I haven't crossed paths with James or Nancy since, my focus remains on advancing the company's growth. Their choices serve as reminders of the importance of dedication and hard